With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
I'm Alex Rodriguez.
And I'm Jason Kelly.
From Bloomberg, this is The Deal. Each week, you'll hear us in conversation with business icons.
This show will explore deal-making across sports, media, and entertainment.
That is a harsh lesson in business.
Sports is not as simple as bringing a bunch of big names together.
I didn't want to do another stomp you out speech.
It opened up so many more doors.
The show is called The Deal.
Listen to The Deal.
Listen to The Deal on Spotify.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and I am excited to bring on a special guest, Joel Kraushaar from the 12 Saturdays podcast. Joel, excited to have you on talking Iowa football. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the podcast before we keep going.
Yeah, so 12 Saturdays, we're actually the 2.0s. So it's 12 Saturdays 2.0. And because my co-host, Tori Brecht, who is the former editor of the Iowa City Press Citizen, which is the local newspaper in Iowa City, a very storied publication, actually, going all the way back. Iowa is such a powerhouse in journalism and writing that's a very proud newspaper. So Tori's the smart one on our podcast. And then he started this a few years ago with a friend of his, and then they had to kind of change course a little bit, and he picked me up along the way. We had a mutual friend, and I'm a former sports reporter and sports director at a radio station and newspaper editor myself, as well as a former NAIA football coach. And I dabbled in trying to play small college football as well. I'm the only member of my family who's not a University of Iowa alum. My parents, my brother, all went to Iowa. My parents have had season tickets for almost 50 years. So while most people in Iowa either grow up, in a deer stand or something like that on a Saturday, I've never shot a gun at an animal, but I've went to almost every home football game, starting with my first ever game being the 1985 number 1 versus number 2 Iowa-Michigan game. That was the first home game I went to as a 4-year-old. And I went to every home game from that point till my freshman year of college.
Wow. Yeah. So you're steeped in it. And Joel, before we kind of keep going, you're a bit of a Renaissance man, right? You sing, you've done journalism, you've done a lot of recording, radio. I mean, how did you get so varied in all these interests?
I think the easiest way is just to say I have really, really significant ADD. I definitely am the poster child for a liberal arts education. I was a freshman in college in 2000. I attended Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa. And I was a music major, and that was my focus. And my roommate my freshman year, shout out to Matt Wenrick, who I know listens because whenever I put out a link, he checks it out. He's from Box Elder, South Dakota, which, think about that for a second. He got a job at the school radio station. Well, at the school radio station, they had someone show up drunk to an on-air shift, and so they had to let that person go. And this was about 2 days before the 2000 presidential election. And so it was all hands on deck. So he asked me if I wanted to just help out. And sure enough, I find myself in front of the Woodbury County Courthouse doing live remotes with the department head of the political science department, doing interviews of, what turned out to be one of the most historical elections of all time. And that got me into radio. I ended up getting hired as a student, just doing shifts and doing some sports stuff because of my background. And then it just kind of went away. And then about 7-8 years ago, I had a friend in radio. I had this idea to start this newspaper with another guy who was affiliated with the radio station. And found myself, going from insurance to running a newspaper and running the sports department at a radio station and hosting AM radio for 3 years. And so, yeah, just a whirlwind. And my dad always said, even if you don't know what you're doing, just do it with confidence. And that's always kind of how I approach life.
There you go. There you go. Well, we're really excited to have you on the podcast. And just for those of you, if you're just finding us here, you can find us wherever podcasts are: Spotify, Google, Apple. We're on YouTube. And then, of course, you can always find me on the College Huddle, the Big Ten Huddle edition, Tuesday nights, 9 p.m. live. That's 9 p.m. Eastern, because I totally forgot when we were emailing back and forth, Joel, that we were going to be in different time zones. So that's 9 p.m. Eastern for you guys. And then when do you guys drop your episodes?
Typically, we'll drop our episodes on Wednesdays. We're not recording weekly right now just because I'm full on travel baseball dad right now. And the Iowa baseball team started out with such high expectations, and just injuries, have plagued them. And so what we were anticipating maybe following that season a little bit more, we haven't. I think we're going to do some special stuff around the Big Ten baseball tournament. And obviously, women's college basketball gave us so much this year as Hawkeyes, and the last 4 years as Hawkeyes. And that was been really fun to watch. For me, as someone who had parents who really talked to us about how important Vivian Stringer was to not just women's basketball, but women's athletics. Having an African-American women's head coach was something that my dad made sure my brother and I appreciated and understood how special that was. So I always had a knowledge of Iowa women's basketball. But if I could tell you at the age of 7 that I could name the roster, I would say no way. My 7-year-old son can tell you every women's player on that roster, just because of how that team just really personified our state and our fan base, not just because of the excellence of Caitlin Clark. I think in my household, Kate Martin is our favorite player. I mean, just because of all the little things she does. I mean, my kids are also, kids of a coach who talks about the process nonstop and how you do the little things and your role and you play to your strengths so that your teammates can play to theirs. And that's what Kate Martin did. That's what that whole Iowa team. And Lisa Bluter is just such a fantastic coach. So that gave us a lot to talk about on the 12 Saturdays podcast the last year.
For sure. And I mean, they took the country by storm, and I was bummed to see them lose in the final, but what a great run the past couple of years for Iowa women's basketball.
And you never need to be ashamed to lose to good basketball teams or to good teams. Yep. That's one thing that I think is hard sometimes for us as a fan base, or any fan base. And I think that's what's unique about what we do in this. We're fans who have some media background, who have some media experience, that we have a microphone literally. And sometimes we all use it a little bit more aggressively than we should.
Oh, yes.
But at the same time, when you look at it, appreciate what has happened more so than, be mad about what didn't.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joel, I had asked you originally, we wanted to do like instead of a State of the Union, kind of state of the Iowa program, and particularly for football.
Yeah.
But before we kind of get there, I love history and context, because I think to your point, sometimes we, with the microphones, we ignore context altogether. And we're like, why is this team bad? And you're like, if the non-fan looked at Rutgers for this past season, I think Rutgers had the best season they've ever had.
Yeah.
And I know they went 7-6, but with the schedule they had, I was like, do you understand what Greg Schiano's doing over there?
I think he's one of the best coaches that, because of his struggles in the NFL and some of the other controversies that have he's been adjacent to in his career, with being a Joe Paterno tree, he has some of the run that he had at Rutgers in the Big East when he had Ray Rice and Leonard, the running back Leonard, and that group, the defensive players that he had coming through that I don't think people remember how special of a run that was.
Yeah.
And he's primed now. And people also forget he initially had a commitment from Saquon Barkley. Like there's a world where Saquon Barkley is a Rutgers Scarlet Knight. So there's a universe where he brings Rutgers back to relevancy. And I think it's possible because of just the recruiting area that he's in. I mean, within a 4-hour drive is some of the most talented players in the country, something we don't have the luxury of at the University of Iowa.
Yeah. Speaking of great coaches, so Kirk Ferentz, I think this is his 25th, or he just had his 25th season.
Yeah.
I think his 25th anniversary this year.
His first season was 1999. Which was my senior year of high school. So that was, I was set when they hired this no-name Kirk Ferentz in December of 1998. The fan base was outraged because we could have had Bob Stoops, and that was all the narrative was Bob Stoops this, Bob Stoops that, and the truth is, yes, Bob Stoops was probably the number one candidate. But on our podcast, we had Kyle Bowlesby, who runs one of the largest coaching search firms in the country, on our podcast. Well, Kyle's father is Bob Bowlesby, who's the former Pac-12 commissioner and Big 12 commissioner, and he's also the AD that hired Kirk Ferentz at the University of Iowa. And we talked to Kyle about it, and Kyle's like, he was not a popular man because of this, but he did his due diligence, and he wasn't going to let Bob Stoops' timeline of having the Oklahoma offer on his desk accelerate their process. And ultimately, Stoops went to Oklahoma, and that history there is great. And I'm not saying we would have had any more or less success if Bob had been there. But I think Kirk Ferentz was the perfect fit for what Iowa needed in 1999. And that was somebody who was convicted, someone who had the moral hangover, was never going to exceed an actual hangover. Like he's one of those guys that will do the right thing, even if it means the wrong result's going to happen from a wins and loss standpoint. I think that's generally the compass. And I think that fits really well with Iowa. It just took some time for that to happen. But you talk to guys, we had Dallas Clark on our podcast. You talk to Dallas, whose walk-on year was Kirk's first year. And there was just no wavering in the leadership. And everybody, you either bought in or you left. And everybody bought in, and by 2002, they're in the Orange Bowl. So it's one of those things where the history of Kirk Ferentz is the dude was a hell of an offensive line coach. Joe Alt, the number 5 overall pick in this year's NFL draft, his father, John, who was a longtime player for the Kansas City Chiefs, John's position coach at the University of Iowa was Kirk Ferentz. He's the one who banged the table with Ozzie Newsome with the Ravens to draft Jonathan Ogden. He's the one who is, in Cleveland, where he's coaching with 2 of his best friends, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, is saying, we can do this. We're a good team if we build from the lines out. Like, he's been around 2 of the most important, I think, head coaching tree coaches in college in football. Bill Belichick in the NFL and Hayden Fry in college. When you look at Hayden Fry's staff in the 80s, Bob Stoops, Bill Snyder, Barry Alvarez, Dan McCarney, that list goes on and on. Belichick's NFL tree, and Nick Saban. Nick Saban's one of his star players at Michigan State University is Phil Parker, Kirk's defensive coordinator at Iowa. Yep. So I think when you look at Kirk Ferentz, you say, has he won a championship? No. But has he done more with less than probably any other coach who was going to take that job 25 years ago? I think the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, one of the other finalists was Mike Riley, the former Nebraska and Oregon State head coach. And I think Mike's a great coach. I got to know Mike a little bit coaching high school football. But I just don't think he's the right personality. Kirk Ferentz is the right personality for the generation of Iowans that he needed to, fund the program for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
Now that might be changing a little bit because this younger generation is less patient, the generation that I'm a part of, but I'm a little old school. So Kirk, I am one of the in Kirk we trust guys, and he's not steered me wrong, but I think that he handled this past year properly as far as moving on the offensive side, which I know we need to talk about that giant elephant in the room, which is the whole having your son not be a successful offensive coordinator for your Division I Big Ten program.
I'm Alex Rodriguez.
And I'm Jason Kelly.
From Bloomberg, this is The Deal. Each week, you'll hear us in conversation with business icons.
This show will explore deal-making across sports, media, and entertainment.
That is a harsh lesson in business.
Sports is not as simple as bringing a bunch of big names together.
I didn't want to do another stomp you out speech.
It opened up so many more doors.
The show is called
The Deal.
Listen to The Deal.
Listen to The Deal on Spotify.
Yeah. Well, why don't we go there next? Because that was a big thing, especially outside of Iowa.
It still is. You've got people trolling, like the Boston Red Sox are trolling Iowa football because they scored 10 runs in a baseball game. It's like, and I'm a Yankee fan, so that doubly pissed me off. Sorry, I'm sorry for saying that. For doubly ticked me off, but it's just, let me ask you, from an outsider's perspective, what was your opinion watching Iowa football and the Brian Ferentz influence?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember probably the way I would describe it. So it was a South Dakota State game a couple years ago, that first game, and I saw that Iowa won 7-3.
FCS national champion South Dakota State team. Let's put that up.
And a good, there
3 NFL draft picks on that South Dakota State team.
Yeah, really good FCS team, right? They would beat a lot of Group of 5 teams.
Good friend of mine was the offensive coordinator there at that time. So
so a good program, but I remember seeing that game and saying, oh, that's a low scoring game. I wonder who scored the touchdown for Iowa. And then you
Jack Campbell.
Yeah. Well, and I think it wasn't it 2 safeties? No.
Jack Campbell. Yeah. I know Jack had a safety in there. I don't remember what it was. But.
Yeah. But it was 2 safeties and a field goal. And I'm like, what happened? And there's a Ohio State beat writer that I follow who I think actually got into it with Kirk, Doug Lesmerises.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he's very well known. Very well known. I think he's a very good reporter and he's not afraid to mix it up.
He is.
But he was he would joke on his podcast that he was responsible for the 25 point a game rule that kind of came out.
Right.
And so I say all that, give all that context that it's just you're in a rock and a hard place when your offense is not performing and it's your son. And it's that professional, what do you do when those lines are blurred? And I think I felt it should have happened sooner. But at the same time, it was hard, and this is where I'd be curious to get your thoughts. Iowa has never been a powerhouse offense.
Correct.
But
in the Hayden Fry era, actually, they were in the top. Yeah, but that's under Kirk Ferentz, you are correct. Outside of the 2002 year when Brad Banks is the runner-up in the Heisman, and they were number 3 in total, or no, they were number 12 in total offense that year.
Yeah. Something. And then, of course, when they played Ohio State in 2017, which Brian
Ferentz was the architect of that.
Yeah. So he can, so I think this is the thing that I always felt like Iowa's offense was effective. It wasn't high powered necessarily, but it was effective. And I felt like later on in Brian Ferentz's tenure, it just felt very ineffective. And I was like, I just don't know how this is going to keep working. So that was my perception from outside. There are certainly a few Brian Ferentz jokes on this podcast, so I don't want to, I'll be completely
same on ours. Same on ours.
But I think I respected the difficulty of that decision for Kirk. So, but yeah, what were your thoughts?
So my whole thing with it is nepotism is great until it's not. I mean, this country is honestly built on right, wrong, or indifferent. It's built on family businesses, right? We all love to support the mom and pop pizza shop down the street when it's grandpa started it, son was running it, and now the grandchildren are they're making this thing thrive. And that's the heartwarming story that we all want to watch on diners, drive-ins, and dives on a Friday night.
Right.
And honestly, when it's Bobby Petrino and Paul Petrino having it click when they're at Louisville, I mean, it's glorious and it's brotherly, it's great. It's a family business. The way I approached it is, if you looked at a blank or a nameless resume that said all Big Ten player, cup of coffee in the NFL, goes to a scouting department for Bill Belichick, works themselves up to a position coach to coach arguably the greatest tight end room in the history of the NFL of Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski. Then the individual goes to Big Ten University as an offensive line coach, produces 4 first-round draft picks, or 4 NFL draft picks, one of which being Brian Bulaga and Brandon Sheriff, and then graduates up to tight ends coach, where he coaches George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, and so on. Do you see where I'm going? If you took nameless resume, that person became an offensive coordinator, no one would balk at the credentials of that path, save for maybe being a play caller at a smaller college or even a play caller in the NFL. Mm-hmm. The only knock to me when they hired Brian was he just didn't have a ton of play calling experience. Mm-hmm. But I'm also someone who doesn't think you need a ton of play calling experience to be good at play calling. I mean, especially if you've been around at the levels that you've been around. Brian should have worked. And I think that there's a myriad of reasons as to why it didn't. And I think some of it is the lack of development at the quarterback position. And some of that onus is Kirk's responsibility. And when Ken O'Keefe retired as the offensive coordinator, he also retired as the quarterback's coach. And he was around as a consultant and helped Brian. But I just think that position is so hard to develop as it is, that if you don't have someone with confidence, you're not going to recruit the top level talent, and you're not going to develop the talent that you have at the level that you need it to develop. And in the era of the transfer portal, it makes it even harder, because now everybody can re-recruit the kid they missed on, every year. Mm-hmm. If you really like somebody. If Cade McNamara is healthy, is Brian still the offensive coordinator? No, he's not. Brian's going to Maryland, and I think the fan base, I think it's split right down the middle. You have the people who will always appreciate Brian for who he is and what he did for the university, and you have the people who will just be angry that the head coach hired, in their eyes, his dumb son who put the offense back 15 years. And I think the only thing we can do healthily as a fan base is just move on and not look back. And the Tim Lester era is here. I think that there's a lot of people who they wanted to go hire some sexy, avant-garde offensive mastermind. Well, you know what? That doesn't work at Iowa. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't right now. There's still going to be situational football. We have another freak of nature Australian punter on campus now. We have a defense that returns a lot of firepower on it. And honestly, you got to ask who Kirk Ferentz is. Kirk Ferentz is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan through and through. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be built around defense, playing smart field position, situational football. He's also a big baseball guy. He's a huge Earl Weaver fan, and like an old school baseball guy. And so he talks about small ball. Like let's challenge the defense, but ultimately we're going to run the football. And where I think Iowa has struggled is I've never seen a rash of offensive line injuries like we have had. Guys who never ever saw the field, just like highly recruited guys, highly respected guys who just medically retired their junior year. I think we've had 4 or 5 of those the last like 6 years.
Wow.
So, and you just, and then the Caden Proctor drama, he commits, he leaves, he comes back and leaves again. I don't think was ever going to be a fit in the culture at Iowa. And you know this, being an Ohio State guy, you've got the block O. I mean, everything is culture. It's been that way since Earl Bruce has been there. Well, it's been that way since Woody was there. So it's like culturally, you got to fit at Iowa. Yeah. And that's why you get kids from Walk-Onville, USA, who become, Marshall Yanda and are going to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer. I mean, that kid is from a town of Anamosa, Iowa, of like 950 people. There's probably as many people in the women's prison as there are in the actual population. And he was the meanest offensive lineman ever to come through Iowa and possibly to play in the NFL. And so that's what Iowa needs. That's what I think Iowa has. I think fans are going to be really surprised at how this young offensive line is and how talented they are. And it's a blue collar group. It's I wouldn't be surprised if 2 or 3 of them are playing for Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions in a couple of years. Like they're the bite your kneecap guys. Like they'll just kick your butt and then they'll go to church the next day and,
nice.
do their thing. So
nice. You're alluding to a question I want to ask a little later, but before I do that, Tim Lester's coming in. Maybe this is kind of a combo question, but how is the fan base feeling about Tim Lester? And also, like, where is the Iowa fan base on Kirk currently? Because obviously we talked about Brian, but Kirk is tied to him. A, because he hired him, but B, because he's his son. So, like, does Tim Lester kind of wash some of that away from Kirk, or is the heat turning up a little bit on Kirk?
The heat's there, but I don't think the heat's there from the people that matter. Iowa's a weird spot, I think, in that Kirk Ferentz isn't ever getting fired from the University of Iowa. Now, they may encourage him to retire earlier than what Kirk wants to retire, but he's also going to be 70. I mean, I think he's 68 right now. Yeah. He'll turn 69 in August. And yeah, we're a fan base that knows when our head coach's birthday is. But so he'll be 69, and you can't tell it from talking to him or from seeing him on the field. Like, he's as dialed in and in shape and as he's ever been. The Tim Lester thing, I think, is all a wait and see. I don't know anybody who's like, holy crap, we hired Tim Lester as our offensive coordinator. But I think any of us who have done the research and looked at it, like those Western Michigan teams, when he had healthy receivers and healthy quarterbacks, they were good teams. It's just a matter of can he bring in a portal quarterback, which they had Brendan Sullivan on campus this weekend. We're recording this on Cinco de Mayo. We had him on campus this weekend, the Northwestern potential transfer. And then there's some discussion that General Booty, the Oklahoma transfer, is going to maybe find his way to Iowa City this week for a visit. So I think Iowa recognizes that the Deacon Hill era, thank God, is over and he's off campus. But I've never seen somebody have such poor throwing fundamentals as a Division I quarterback as that guy. And I'm not one who really tries to criticize players too much, because I've been one and I've coached them and I know how hard it is to do what they do. But he was doing stuff that just like high school kids don't screw up. But and again, to Iowa's fault, they didn't coach him up. So hopefully they can get a portal quarterback who can either compete with Cade McNamara for the starting job. And let's just be realistic. Cade McNamara hasn't played a full season of football in 4 years. Or 3 years. And so you got to have somebody else, because it looks like the redshirt freshman is not ready yet. And Marco Lainez, and then James Resar, their incoming freshman quarterback, is a national class track athlete and wanted to finish his senior year of track. He runs a sub 10 700 meters as a quarterback. And so
It's
Iowa's
moving.
not had that kind of speed at the quarterback position. And he's not like a dual threat guy. He's a run when the pocket breaks down guy. So I think he fits Iowa's scheme. His throwing mechanics are a little sloppy, but that's where having a guy, Tim Lester is a quarterback's coach. So hopefully he can rebuild the room in that regard. And I don't know how the fan base feels about Tim Lester. I'm bullish on the hire, though. RPO guys often don't use tight ends. He is one of the few that really has built a system around tight ends. And as we all know, that's what Iowa is. We're tight end university.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Luke Lachey could be I know that's painful being the son of the Ohio State color commentator on the radio. Luke Lachey, he might be the next great one to come through the black and gold as far as the NFL goes.
That guy's a stud. He's so good.
Yeah, I was sitting about 8 rows away from him when he broke his leg last year.
That was I think the saddest thing for me last year was just as it seemed like they were starting to get some juice, and Lachey goes down, McNamara goes down, and
then all goes down against Wisconsin, and it's like, what did we do? Like, what sort of atonement do I need to do as a fan? Like, is this all because of how Amani Hooker took that first interception for a pick 6 against Ohio State? Is this just years of retribution for that one day, that one glorious day in Kinnick Stadium, which we've had many glorious days in Kinnick Stadium, don't get me wrong, but every Saturday when you get to turn around and wave to that children's hospital is glorious in Kinnick Stadium. So
one of my favorite, and I mean, it was, you referenced the 2017 Ohio State beatdown, but I remember like after the first quarter, Urban Meyer just like so excited about the children's hospital waving to the kids.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, where did that come from?
So it was my understanding of the tradition. I think there's a Big Ten Network special on it. There was a woman in Des Moines who posted on Facebook. She said, we all should just turn around and wave to these kids in the children's hospital. And it went viral, and the university got a hold of it, and it's become, we had some people sitting next to us last year who were from Texas. They were big Texas A&M fans, but they were just like, we had to get here to see this. Like, they just wanted to see this tradition. So people come for no reason. I mean, they have no allegiance to either team playing, just to experience that. And I'm very partial to it, as my 2 sons, after they were born, had to spend some time in the children's hospital. We're just talking a couple of days for evaluation. Nothing, thank God, nothing was, intervention really had to be done. But when you're there, you realize that that's all that matters to you, is your sick family. And to have that, thing be something that those kids are all looking forward to. And the thing that's impressive to me is you talk to these players. So Drake Kulik, the former fullback for Iowa, he is from my hometown. His dad and my dad were surgeon and physical therapists, had a strong relationship together. And I talked to Drake about it, and he's like, whenever stuff's bad for you, you just remember that there's kids with cancer watching you play football. And I mean, that's just point blank. That's all that matters. I mean, so those guys, they absorb so much strength from the fight that's going on across the street. And I think that that's real. I don't think that's just me being sentimental or romantic as a journalist and a podcaster. Like, they spend meaningful hours in that children's hospital, in the off season, and just as volunteers over there. And it's not just the football program, it's every athlete in that school. And Kirk and Mary Ferentz, we'll never go talk too much about it, but Brian actually lost a child, and he and his wife, and they talk about it openly on a Big Ten Network thing. And I think Kirk and Mary have given over $7 million to the children's hospital, in the last 10 years. It's really, really an important thing, not just to them because of their position. Their family has been directly affected by the work that is done over there. And so it's, if you haven't been there, you got to come. I mean, if any reason next time Ohio State's there, just don't bring Orlando Pace with you. That's still scarring from my childhood watching 75 come pulling around the end or 76 come pulling around the end. And but it's so worth that first quarter experience, you know.
Yeah. One of the coolest traditions, but also one of the most meaningful acts in the not just in the Big Ten, but in college football, because
in sports. I mean, it's become something. Well, and you know, it kind of put Iowa on the map, and then you have Caitlin Clark doing cool stuff, and Jason Sudeikis is coming to Carver Hawkeye Arena. You know, Ted Lasso himself. I mean, it's really, we're in a unique time as Iowa fans. I hope that we don't all get so frustrated by offensive output. By the way, we've won 10 or more football games the last 2 seasons too. Within it, I think that's the thing that makes people the most mad, is that they wonder what could have been if we had an offense.
Yeah.
But you know, appreciate what's special about our university, and that's you know, that's the people, and Kirk Ferentz is a big driving factor for why there's so many good people affiliated with the University of Iowa football program.
Yeah, that's good. This I'm going to get you out on this, and this might, we can dialogue a little bit.
I'm long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. So I think a lot of people in the Big Ten, like if you look at like power rankings or what people think, I think the top 4 seems very, very clear. Ohio State, Oregon in some sort of fashion, Michigan and Penn State, in some sort of order. And then USC is kind of this wild card. And then
I'd put Penn State in the same terrarium as USC as a wild card.
Yeah, I would. I think they could. I would agree. But here's where I really want to ask you about. Iowa is kind of the next tier in a lot of people's eyes. You look at the schedule, like this is their schedule for those who are unaware. They host Illinois State, they host Iowa State, they host Troy. They go to Minnesota, they go to Ohio State, which is obviously, that's a tough game. But then they host Washington, who's completely depleted. They go to Michigan State, who there's some juice, but like they have a lot to rebuild.
Don't sleep on how much Kirk Ferentz and Mark D'Antonio hate each other too.
Yeah.
And I know Mark D'Antonio's not there anymore, but there is, he's still around, and there is a ton of hatred between Michigan State and Iowa. And please, if you don't know this, go back and read about the recruiting of Jaleel Johnson, the defensive tackle for Iowa. And it was right during the rhabdomyolysis days. And there is so much hatred between Kirk Ferentz and Michigan State, which is Phil Parker's alma mater, by the way. It's heated.
I feel like I need to get you back on for some of that history.
Yeah.
Because that's a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
But so go to Michigan State, who is obviously rebuilding. Host Northwestern, who they had a great season last year, but you look at their, like, I don't know if they're not doing a lot in recruiting or transfer portal. In fact, a lot of people
losing.
They're losing. They host Wisconsin, they go to UCLA, they go to Maryland, and then they host Nebraska. So they avoid the best teams coming over from the Pac-12.
True.
Really, a lot of the maybe more difficult, like former West teams are home. Nebraska, Wisconsin. Like,
yeah, but that's because we played at their places last year. So that's
sure.
where, I mean, the Big Ten did try to honor some of that, you know, that home and away thing with that.
Yeah. So here's my question.
But they're still rivalry games. So home field doesn't matter as much if you look at the overall record of those games.
True.
Historically.
But here's my question for you, Joel. Could their ceiling be a berth in the Big Ten championship game?
Yeah. If the offense is competent, why not? And I'm also, gosh, if you listen to our podcast regularly, you'll learn that I am a optimist as you'll find. And I'll explain why. I come from a town that at one point held the record for most consecutive losing seasons in high school football in the country. My class was the first class to never have one. Like, I'm one of those guys that you're going to have to freaking kill me to get me to stop coming after you. And that's my mentality. And I take that mentality to my fandom. And in fact, if you go back to 2017, I'm sorry to keep bringing up the Ohio State 2017 game. I went on an Iowa message board and I went off on people and I said, you guys, no one in the world thought Buster Douglas had a chance until that fight started. And I'm saying you guys are foolish to not think that Iowa doesn't have a chance in this game. I know we're like 27-point underdogs or whatever it is, but I said we have 2 NFL tight ends. They have 0 NFL tight ends on that team. I was like, Nate Stanley was the NFL quarterback. He wasn't a front runner, but he still had the talent. I was like, all we have to do is not turn the ball over, and good things are going to happen. Now, 2 things that I had no clue were going to happen, and there's 2 things are the reason Iowa won that game. Hooker pick 6 the first play of the game. That lit the dynamite off in that stadium. I've never heard it that loud. And then Bosa gets tossed for the headbutt of Nate Stanley at the end of the second quarter, and now your best pass rusher is gone. So those are the 2 things that were nuts with that game. But there's no reason that Iowa can't be in a position to win all of those games. You know, you look back, Ohio State, that's going to be a very challenging game. But your quarterback room isn't what it once was. No. There's not a Heisman Trophy winner looking on. I mean, no. Lincoln Kleinholz going to be your quarterback? I mean, who won the job coming out of spring ball?
Well, it's most likely between Will Howard and Devin Brown.
Yeah.
But
I'm pulling for the pure South Dakota kid, since I have some ties to that town. But at the same time, when was the last time Chip Kelly really had an effective offense? I mean, what was the kid in Oregon, like the who tore his ACL? I mean, I'm just trying to think. I'm just trying to remember that kid's name. But I'm just saying,
Dennis Dixon.
Yeah. So Chip Kelly was like, UCLA wasn't it for him. So he bails and he goes to Ohio State, which was a smart move by him. There's not a single game outside of that Ohio State game that I'm like, I'm worried. And that's just because I believe in our defense. I really do. We're going to miss Cooper DeJean, but there's a kid named Sebastian Castro who I have all the confidence in the world to be the best defensive back in the Big Ten next year. Honestly, he'll probably win it, the best DB award, the Woodson Award. Again, he's that good. And he's not a corner, but he's an impact player. So as an Iowa fan, I hope we win in the Rose Bowl for the first time ever. Granted, it won't be the Rose Bowl. It'll just be a regular season game against UCLA. But Washington makes me so sad because Kalen DeBoer, University of Sioux Falls, was in my conference that I coached in. I'm undefeated against Kalen DeBoer. I'll just put that out there. And Ryan, so Grubby, his OC, who's at the Seahawks now. One of my college buddies grew up with Grubb in Kingsley, Iowa, a town of like 600 people. And so I was hoping Washington was going to be Washington. They're now the Jed Fish variety of Washington, which Fish and Ferentz are connected through Brian. Actually, they coached together for the Patriots. So there's a lot going on now. Brian Ferentz is an analyst at Maryland. That was a game that meant nothing to the fan base. Now all of a sudden is the Ferentz Bowl. So there's going to be a lot for our fans to get concerned about, I think, as the year goes on.
Yeah.
I do. If I was going to predict, I think it's a 9-win season for the Hawks. Realistically, they get some bounces going their way, though. Then all of a sudden, you go into that Nebraska game with the Raiola kid probably going to be the starter as a true freshman there, and all of a sudden that kid's in Kinnick Stadium with Phil Parker, and maybe a lot on the line, and I hate how much I like Matt Rule as a person because I really hate Nebraska as a team. And I just want to see Iowa continue to win that game. It's much easier to live the life of an Iowan when Nebraska is mediocre, which is what they've been the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's helpful. I wondered, I wonder if the Ohio State game is the only game that they will be an underdog in.
We might be an underdog against Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, it depends, because I think there was a lot of, and I think Wisconsin will be good this year. I I just thought they were going to be really, really good out the gate last year, and I don't know. They're trying to do what you had mentioned would not work at Iowa, which they got Phil Longo. They're doing
Yeah.
throwing the ball.
Air raid at Camp Randall, I don't think, and it's weird. I'm so surprised Fickle went that way. I really am. Just knowing who he is, where he came from, and I mean, he and Mike Vrabel are like groomsmen in each other's weddings, and Vrabel's got to be sitting there going, "What the hell are you doing, Luke? Run the damn ball. You're Wisconsin." Like I'm not saying that Ron Dane's walking through that door again, or Melvin Gordon or those crew, but it's like I've been to Camp Randall in November. It sucks. I can't imagine catching a ball in Camp Randall in November. And I think they need to make sure that they are able to block it. Let's just put it that way. They've got to be able to run the ball. They just have to. I don't. And Longo is a guy who has just failed up his entire career, and I don't know how that's happened. I mean, he goes from Drake May to Wisconsin, and I'm like, why did you leave Drake May? Like, what the hell? What are you doing? But he's a strength and conditioning coach who somehow is an offensive play caller, and he's not getting hired by his dad. So I mean, I'm sorry, guys. Like the Phil Longo hire to an offensive coordinator position is way weirder to me than Brian Ferentz getting hired as an offensive coordinator somewhere.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just my take. I don't know. Whatever. It's going to be a wild one.
9-3 is the realistic, but maybe they could sneak in.
Yeah, if I'm Vegas, I'm handicapping the over under at 8.5. And I would hammer the over if I was betting that. You guys can't bet in Ohio, can you? Like,
well, I'm in PA, but
okay.
I don't even know.
But that's all everyone talks about here is because we can gamble like crazy now. But it's I just like our chances. If this sounds so weird, but if this punter can figure it out, Iowa's dangerous when you have to go 80 yards. If you have to go 80 yards or more, you're not going to score a ton of points against Iowa.
Yep. Well, and I think what is intriguing for me is it's Iowa, like Iowa's defense. I think it's PFF. I think they have Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, all as the top 3 returning defenses.
And they're college. It's not just top 3 in the Big Ten. That's like top 3 in the
country.
Nation.
Country. Yeah. And you look at who Ohio State has to play. They have to play Iowa. They have to play Oregon. They have to play Penn State. They have to play Nebraska. They have to play Michigan. Like Michigan's got to play Oregon and Ohio State. Penn State's got to play USC. Like the schedules are designed in such a way where I could see all the big, who we would consider the big boys, knocking each other out. And all of a sudden, Iowa's sitting there at 10-2 or an 11-1. You're like, oh, that happened.
And I think,
well, I was just gonna say the thing that I think people in the Big Ten were frustrated was like the West champion always getting in. It's like, how ironic would it be if the first Big Ten championship game in the new era is like Oregon versus Iowa?
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Well, and I think the thing too is it doesn't matter as much anymore since the college football playoff is now expanding to 12. So if for some reason a less worthy team like in Iowa, and I say that tongue in cheek because of, the whole, when that team that lost to Michigan State in the Big Ten championship game would have been competitive in a 12-team college football playoff. So if you put Iowa or Wisconsin, a 10 or an 11 win team that's from the old West that supposedly sucks in the 12-team playoff, now they've got a chance. And I think we're going to see some real football play out. And I think teams that are coached like the Iowa Hawkeyes are coached, where it's one play at a time, one series at a time, one game at a time, they've got a better chance of surprising some people that maybe relies primarily on their overall recruited talent as opposed to their ability to execute. I go back to Nick Saban's last game at LSU, which was the Drew Tate to Warren Holloway Hail Mary. If you go back and watch that game. Incredible. And if you go back and watch the game, there's like 15 NFL guys between the two teams playing on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that whole LSU team is like first and the fourth round draft picks. And Iowa hung with them punch for punch with a much maligned Brian Ferentz as the center of that Iowa football team. So, I mean, it all comes back to Brian. Brian's a Hawkeye. And I actually saw him this weekend at a 7U baseball tournament. But it's one of those things where Iowa football is going to go as far as their offensive turnover margin takes them. At the end of the day, that's the one statistic, in my opinion, that wins Iowa football games. When we do not turn the ball over as an offense, they don't lose. It's just works out that way. And because they'll make a couple field goals, now all of a sudden it's 17-10 or it's 20-10 with 4 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And now the team's panicking. And what do? They got to throw the ball. And here's the Phil Parker secondary, just with all 12 sets of eyes on you. And it's like you're throwing against a spider web. And they get a pick, they kneel it down, and we play in heaven there is no beer, and the team goes and does the hokey pokey in the locker room. So it's Iowa football. And if you don't love it, as Ricky Stanzi said, leave it, because this is who we are. This is what our state is. You know, you go to the state playoffs and it's power football. It's a bunch of high school wrestlers up front blocking for high school wrestlers running the ball. So it's a blast to watch. It's simple. It's elegant. As a former offensive lineman myself, there's nothing prettier than 5 guys stepping in one direction and just knocking people down. And it brings a tear to my eye every time I see it. And it's one of those things that football is great because there is no greater feeling than imposing your will on another man between the confines of the football. And that's how Iowa is built. It's trenches forward and it's trenches on both sides of the ball. And if those two positions, defensive line and offensive line, are working, you're going to have your work cut out for you playing the Hawkeyes. And that's if you're new to Iowa and you haven't heard people talk about it, that's what people love. You know, it would be great if Alex Smith and the spread offense that Urban Meyer ran at Utah showed up and played at football at the University of Iowa. But ultimately, the fans will be just as appreciative if it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, as long as the final score is maybe 31 instead of 17. If we can get a 31-12 victory or a 31-17, we're pretty happy. Because if it goes shootout, we don't win very often. But in a slugfest, we're nightmares in a phone booth. That's what we like to say here in Iowa.
Very cool. Joel, where can we find you again?
You can find us at 12 Saturdays 2.0 on all the podcast platforms. And you can follow us at 12 Saturdays on Twitter or X, whatever it's called nowadays. And then you can follow me at Coach Kraushaar, and it's my last name. But if you put at Coach Kraus, Kraus, it'll populate. Like me, I don't do much on social media anymore because I've got kids and I can't embarrass our family. That's what my wife says. But you can find all of our podcast episodes, and we have some really good episodes. So because Tori and I are former journalists, we've got relationships with Scott Docterman at The Athletic. We had Scott on. Like I said, Dallas Clark. I lucked out. One of my college buddies, Dallas, lives in this town and is his wide receivers coach at their high school, and he's the head coach there, so he hooked me up with Dallas. We've got some relationships throughout the university, and we've built a reputation, so we're getting really good guests on. Jess Settles was going to come on for the next basketball season. I'm trying to get Chris Hassel from CBS Sports on. So Chris and I actually grew up in the same town. We went to high school together. So Chris, I'm hoping to get Chris on to talk some Hawkeye stuff, and we do some cool things. So we do a lot of interviews, but ultimately we're just fans talking Hawkeye football, Hawkeye sports. Tori's older than me, so I give him crap for being old. He gives me crap for being an optimist. It's a good time. We have fun, and we do swear a little bit, so I apologize for that in advance. But we're just guys who are passionate about Hawkeye sports and living in the state of Iowa, because we're so much more than the cornfields the ESPN shows at every commercial break whenever they play a game here. So
welcome to Iowa cornfields. Yeah, that's not it.
Forget about how almost every important TV show written in the last 50 years is written by University of Iowa alums or anything like that.
There you go.
We got Gene Wilder, man.
That dude.
That's why that's why Willy Wonka was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was my favorite movie when I was a kid, because my dad's like, he's a Hawkeye, right? That's all I needed. I'm a Dolphins fan because Reggie Roby was a Hawkeye. Like, I'm just that. There's no pro teams here. We just root for Iowa wherever they are.
Yep. So. There you go. Well, Joel, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Again, you can. We drop a pod every Monday morning at 7. On Spotify. That's the main hub for this podcast. So obviously Google, Apple, YouTube, but if you're on Spotify, make sure you subscribe and let us know what you think. Again, this has been the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Take care. God bless.